Guys, Conor McGregor has announced his comeback again. He told ESPN, quote, "We got confirmation a few days ago that it's all systems go." He goes on, the Mac, the Notorious, will be returning to the UFC octagon this summer. All right, guys. Technically, UFC 303, that's International Fight Week, is on June 29th, and UFC 306 at the Sphere mid-September. Those are summer events, right? When it comes to McGregor returns to fighting, though, those types of announcements, do you firmly believe that this is the one? Yay or nay? Goes.
I want it to be true. I mean, honestly, look, I've run out of cards to give this. I've already given it a yellow. I've already given it a red. There's nothing left. I just have to be positive. And I think based on the way people have been reacting a little bit to this, I feel a little bit more positive in it. But I want it to be true, man. Not so much because I want to see Conor McGregor fight again. It's more because I want to see Michael Chandler released from captivity, right? Like, he's a great fighter, and we've been missing out on him this whole time because of this madness. And, I've been saying this since the very beginning. Like, this is just sort of step one in that whole process, right? If it's all 100% true, that's step one. Step two is they got to get through a camp injury free. They got to get to the fight. That's step two. And step three would be like the motivation at this point. We've kind of heard them both talk about this, that roller coaster, up and down, up and down. Are they going to give us the fight that we all think they can? Because separately, they've been able to give us great fights. I want that fire going into the fight. And then I want the actual fight to pay off. Can you imagine if the fight sucks after all this? Like, come on, man. I'm to the point where, let me know when it happens. Ring my phone. I'll show up and watch it. But at least I feel a little bit more positive this time.
So, yay, you do think this is the one, though?
Yeah, I'll go yay.
Level of excitement, not there yet, but yay, you do feel pretty good about it. What about you, Mike Bond?
Yeah, I think I'm more confident than I've ever been. I guess you can't say anything's 100% when it comes to Conor McGregor in 2024. So you take it all with a little grain of salt, but this feels more real. You see the change of tone both from Dana White and Conor McGregor in like recent days compared to what they were saying a week plus ago. Feels vastly different. Sounds like there was a call made and a conversation had. So hopefully that was productive, and we're just waiting for like an official announcement right now. But yeah, some of the stuff Conor said, a little bit concerning. Obviously, people who are watching this have probably seen, the clip he did with Sports Illustrated with Jake Gyllenhaal, where he was like twitching a little bit. I don't know what was going on there, but obviously a little bit concerning to watch. So he said himself, right? Like, I start a camp, I get a date I think is going to happen, it gets pushed back, I lose motivation, I start drinking, I go on vacation, etc., etc. Nothing that I don't think we really were surprised by when he says that, but to hear him admit it is a little bit insightful, and maybe that shifts a little bit of the blame as far as like why this is being delayed for so long. But you also need to consider, like, it's the UFC side, right? If they had given him the December date, the January date, the March date, all these things that he originally wanted, maybe he'd be locked in. And if it is June 29th, that's 2 months away. I feel pretty confident, or 3 months away, whatever it is. I feel pretty confident he'd lock in now. The media tour is done for Roadhouse, all that stuff, and maybe we get on the path here. But to Goz's point, I do not see this being a boring fight by any stretch. It might be one-sided, it might be quick, but Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor have never put on a boring fight, at least that I've seen or can recall off the top of my head. So even if it's not competitive, it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be exciting, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not worried about the fight itself once we get there. It's just getting there.
Mike, do you think what he said, which was insightful, refreshing to hear about, we hear this, then no. We hear this, then no, and he loses motivation. So do you think that paralleled the whole mess of them trying to figure out UFC 300 and whether they were going to maybe use him or not? Because they came up with so much options. They called John Jones. They ran 3 fighters by Leon Edwards, apparently. I think Khabib even got a call. What do you think happened there?
I don't know. I think they were probably so optimistic they could have got something else for 300 that was big enough, and that 300 is going to sell on itself. We've said this before. They wanted 2 kicks at the can, right? If they think Conor McGregor's return is going to sell 1 million, and they think UFC 300 is going to sell 1 million, no matter who's on the card, then, you're doubling up, obviously. Maybe a McGregor headlined UFC 300 does 2+ million buys or something, but this feels like, from a business sense, the more like practical way to approach it. It's disappointing. as a fan, all that stuff. The fighters themselves, I'm sure Conor would have loved to be on that card, but on the business side, I understand why they did this, even though it kind of backfired and blew up in their face. And could Conor have even fought on that card with this Roadhouse media tour? He said he would have adjusted things, so he could have. So who knows? There is many more layers to this. Conor can say the stuff that they haven't talked about, contract or all that, but he also said, how are they even going to approach me about like a new contract, right? He said that to Ariel Helwani, like, I wouldn't know how to approach me, knowing where my financials, knowing me, understanding the value I bring to the UFC. So yeah, it's going to get complicated, but hopefully they can cross this fight off the list, and then we get to real interesting territory if it's a Conor McGregor with one fight left on his contract.
Yeah, man, would have been nice them at 300, Pereira and Hill at 301, and maybe the other cards have some life. Some of them are on life support. Danny Segura. All right, man. Is this the one, bro? Yay or nay? All systems go, pal.
I hope that it is. I really do. Because I want to see this fight so bad, but I think at this point I'm more tired of just hearing Michael Chandler, hearing Conor McGregor back and forth, and then we've been at this for literally almost an entire year, and it's just exhausting. At this point, I want to see Conor McGregor back. I mean, there's no denying that the sport is far more exciting when he's involved, when he's active, when he's fighting. The fans want it. He wants it. And this whole holdup has just been so bizarre. I know McGregor has said that they haven't had conversations about the contract, but I don't know about that. I do question that. I think somebody like Conor McGregor is literally the person you want to lock in. Anybody else leaving the promotion, probably not good, right? Especially if they're big names. But Conor McGregor, I don't want to say devastating, but it can get pretty close, especially if he's going to continue fighting and is willing to fight for somebody else or even run his own promotions, McGregor Sports Entertainment, right? If that's even still around. But that's going to be very interesting. And the fact that he's talking about it publicly, like that, the fact that he has 2 fights left on his contract and making that very clear, I think it's very interesting. So I hope that he does fight June 29th. I hope that it is against Michael Chandler because we've been waiting for this fight. But I don't know. I feel like the UFC would want to sign a contract and lock him in before, getting any fights done, and then have him be 1 fight away potentially from free agency. So we'll see. I'm optimistic about the June 29th date, about the UFC 303, Noche UFC, the Sphere, Nate Diaz. I don't think that's going to happen. And even you see Dana White saying that he's not into that at all. So we'll see what this unfolds. But I will say this. I do feel like McGregor fights in 2024 because some people are out there saying that McGregor's never going to fight at all. I do think that McGregor fights this year, June 29th. A little hesitant about it, but he fights this year.
Danny, are you not interested, or did Dana sound like he's not interested in Diaz versus McGregor at all, or just at the Sphere?
No, I love the trilogy, and I think that that's a must, right? I think that within Conor McGregor's contract, even if it's just these 2 fights, like you got to do the Nate Diaz one because that's the biggest one that's going to bring in a lot of money, a lot of eyeballs, plus it's unfinished business. It's going to be interesting how they bring in Nate Diaz into the equation because technically he's a free agent. We know that he's going to box Masvidal, but the Sphere one, it's going to be, people are just going to want to watch the show at the Sphere just because the whole dynamic and the whole sort of presentation of it's going to be interesting. And let's not forget, you have Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko as coaches of The Ultimate Fighter. They're most likely going to fight on that card if everything goes well. There's no injuries. That's what it seems like. I don't know about you guys, but I'm super excited for that fight. I feel like that fight has elevated the division, elevated both fighters. It just seems like it's turning out to be a nice little rivalry. So you add that fight, a couple more good ones, and I feel like you got a banging pay-per-view that's going to do quite well. You don't necessarily need Conor McGregor in there. Maybe you save him for November when you go back to MSG or something, but we'll see. And plus, Nate Diaz, look, I wouldn't have a problem with Nate Diaz headlining the Mexican Independence, but it just doesn't feel an Irishman, Nate Diaz, who's technically American. Like, it just doesn't feel as appropriate.
I hear you. But De La Hoya was Mexican American, and he headlined a few in boxing. And Floyd really got a lot of mileage out of Cinco de Mayo weekend and September 16th. So I guess with the right promotion, it could be done. But I understand what you're saying. Nate doesn't give
Not
off
the
this vibe
same.
of sombrero and tacos and
But De La
like,
Hoya really like repped Mexico.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
seeing Nate Diaz out there walk out with like the Mexican flag and whatnot. And you know, De La Hoya is also like fluent in
Correct.
Spanish. It just feels a little bit different.
This is true.
Curious the interest in even bringing Nate Diaz back if he loses to Jorge Masvidal. I don't think
That's
they love
true.
that he fought Jake Paul and that he lost to Jake Paul. And then if he goes 0-2 in boxing, I'd just be curious, especially, you know, Nate Diaz is going to ask for a lot in a new UFC contract to fight Conor McGregor. And he wouldn't have a ton of leverage if they're like, hey, you know, this is what you've been doing since you left the UFC.
Especially if
comment-
you
Don't
get
mind me
KO'd by
intervening
Masvidal.
here. Go ahead.
I said, especially if you get, what happens if he gets KO'd by Masvidal or something, you know, like that's,
Yeah.
you can't walk in there asking for cash like that.
Well, I mean, you can, but we'll see if he gets it. What are the odds that this fight, the trilogy, because we all agree that at some point this fight's going to happen, right? The McGregor Diaz trilogy. What are the odds of it happening outside of the UFC?
Yeah. I mean, I think perfect
think
world
that's
for
the
both
low.
guys. That would be what they would want or where they'd go to. But who knows with Conor, right? Like by the time he actually gets free of a UFC contract, if he's able to get these two fights and go through the exclusive negotiation period and the matching thing and all these things that go with it, could be looking at a couple of years, whereas Nate Diaz at that point. But ideally, yeah, for their pocketbooks, that would be the best thing. You know, McGregor promotions, Nate Diaz's promotions coming together,
Fighting.
and they take 90% of the pie instead of 16% of it or whatever.
I don't
Yeah.
think it happens in the UFC. I honestly think it happens
Really?
outside. It happens on Netflix. Netflix is going to blow up with fighting.
Imagine that'd be wild. Yeah, that's certainly going to be interesting. At least one side of it is done with Nate Diaz being a free agent, which we thought that was going to be probably not likely, or at least I thought. McGregor's
nightmare,
probably
though.
looking at what he's doing with boxing Jake Paul, boxing Jorge Masvidal, and he probably wants some of that as well, some of that freedom. So it's going to be interesting.
All right, but let me tie something in. I'm going to go back to Mike. First, I'm going to read two comments. Lazy Bed says, free agent Conor might be the most intriguing avenue he has left in his career. And then Zishan, Eagles War says, Conor wants to finish the two fights on his contract and go get that Saudi money. All right, so Mike, McGregor promotions, Diaz's promotion, yes, they would probably get more that way. But we saw what happened in Dallas. It looked like it popped. I don't know if it was a pay-per-view windfall, but are these guys onto something where like just getting paid the Saudi by what the payments that the Saudis are paying kind of just gets the whole promotion thing off them and they just show up and be themselves? Where's the money here? Is it more on what they can do on their own or going to Saudi Arabia and just collecting a payday there?
I mean, I think it can be a combination of both, right? I think both things are true. They could go there and get probably an astronomical guaranteed rate. And then on top of that, there would probably be a cut of pay-per-view. And that would be on them to promote it however they see fit in that sense. So, yeah, I mean, I would expect these guys could make more than they would in the UFC to do this fight, but you never know too, right? I don't know what Conor's contract looks like, what a new contract to potentially re-sign as a part of this fight would be, all that stuff. I mean, the UFC money is definitely the safer bet to a degree because you know that promotional machine is going to do something for you to a certain extent. Over there, it can be a little more different, but if they're getting bigger guaranteed purses from the outset, that might be bigger than the money they would get altogether from the UFC. So I don't know. I know Turki Al-Sheikh is a big Conor McGregor fan, and there's nothing more he would like to have him fight over there. So we'll see how this all shakes out. There's a lot of runway to go before we even get to that being a more realistic conversation, but they would certainly empty the pocketbook for that fight. I have no doubt.
Do you think all systems go meant a new contract was restructured or just the number was meant for this fight, leaving him with one after the Chandler fight?
I don't think so, because he said that to ESPN whenever it was, like last Tuesday or something, and then he went on Ariel Helwani's show after that and talked about the contract and said there's been no discussions, things like that. So unless something's changed in the past few days, it doesn't sound like that's being part of this agreement per se.
And then goes, so McGregor, you know that saying in vino veritas, right? You can apply it to whatever, but in wine there's truth. It does seem though when he speaks about the UFC, he speaks with a passion about how much he loves fighting for the UFC, and I think what it means also is it's a big deal for Conor McGregor when he fights in the UFC for his ego, right? He can go do the stuff that Ngannou's done and all that, and no disrespect to what's going on. A lot of hardcores tune in there, but I think he gets something out of celebrities that tune in, the athletes, fellow athletes that tune in, and all the fans that tune in to an actual UFC pay-per-view. So you think that would draw him more than going to Saudi Arabia and doing what's happening there, which is yet to really take off, to be fair to those guys?
I think it's been there, done that type of thing. You know, like this is all just sort of evolving in front of our eyes. And I think he's been the big guy in the UFC. He's had the big fights. I think there's something intriguing to him about maybe going to Saudi Arabia, maybe putting on his own thing. I think it's a new level of celebrity that he would engage with. And I think he'd lean more the other way.
Man, see, I think MMA, UFC until the day he is done. But
If you're
boxing,
winning,
that's when he'll turn to Saudi Arabia. I feel like he feels like one win, and I'm a title contender either at 70 and 55. By the way, I think he cleared up that 85 was just him having a laugh. That's good news. But yeah, I think he feels like I'm so big that if I just win one fight, I'm now a title contender. I mean, look at Steve Usyk got a title fight, for crying out loud. You gonna tell me they can't find a way to squeeze Conor McGregor in there if he doesn't have an epic KO of Michael Chandler? That's not my prediction. I'm just saying, and that's what I think he thrives on, is a big UFC pay-per-view when the whole world is watching him on that stage. I think the Saudis will be where he goes when it's boxing time.
But you got to win. You have to win fights to be in that position.
And you got to fight to win too.
Yeah. And poor Usyk, leave him alone. He woke up, he was having a normal day. Why'd you have to throw shade on him?